This is Blazing Chrome, a run-and-gun shooter inspired by the likes of Contra and Metal Slug. And it's the love letter to these classics I've been waiting for, a perfect blend of detailed, period-appropriate 2D pixel art, expertly crafted stages, and challenge to spare. But what specifically makes it a good game, and what did it take to build it? On this episode of Digital Foundry, we're taking a deeper look at the creation of the game. I had a chance to speak with its lead designer Danilo Diaz, who has shared some insight on what it takes to build a game like Blazing Chrome. Beyond this, we'll also test the game across each console platform. So, load up and get ready for
Blazing Chrome!
The 2D action game. Once the staple of every home console, these meticulously crafted pixel art games became increasingly uncommon during the mid-90s as a new wave of 3D graphics conquered the industry. 2D games never truly vanished, but 3D was clearly king. But as young developers that grew up playing these games started building their own, the art form experienced a revival. The rise of indies brought with it a new lease on life for the 2D action game, with many attempting to deliver an authentic experience on new hardware. Nailing that feeling of authenticity, however, is no small task. Relying on modern technology can produce beautiful results, but perfecting that feeling of running on older hardware is more challenging. Sonic Mania remains one of the finest examples of this. It's a game that genuinely feels authentic to the mid-90s in every way, while expanding upon what makes those classics so good. It's much the same with Blazing Chrome. In many ways, this feels like a follow-up to Contra the Hardcore, as it might have existed on Sega Saturn. And for good reason. Blazing Chrome started off as a love letter to that very game, with the earliest prototypes built using art from both the Hardcore and Contra 3. These prototypes evolved, giving us a glimpse of the refinement process. Aesthetically, Blazing Chrome differs greatly from JoyMasher's previous projects. Titles such as Oniken deliver a dark 8-bit style reminiscent of the NES, but Blazing Chrome is all about 16-bit, specifically the Mega Drive. Like the best games on the Mega Drive then, there's a focus on deep parallax scrolling with a limited color palette, but the developers have opted to push beyond this spec, introducing a huge number of sprites, scaling and rotation, and other tricks. What makes Blazing Chrome special comes down to a combination of things, I believe. Primarily the aesthetic, the game design itself, and the controls. First, let's consider the Contra games. One of the defining elements in Konami's classic series is the variety. Each stage offers a unique challenge with over-the-top set pieces, boss fights, and variations on the central gameplay concept. You're never facing the same challenge for very long before something new comes along. This variety is key to any Contra game, and Blazing Chrome takes the same approach. Like Contra, running and gunning serves as the foundation, but the developers mix things up on a regular basis. From the Metal Slug-inspired mech suits and speeder bike stages, to the Super Scalar-esque tunnel battle and eventual showdown in cyberspace. Finding the right balance is always a challenge though. Make no mistake, Blazing Chrome is a challenging game, but each section is broken up into digestible chunks that can be mastered. It's this mastery that is so satisfying. The levels are created in just such a way that when you do fail, it often feels as if you just barely fell short. You can see the path through the madness. There's this feeling of one more try that pervades the game right up through the ending credits. At its core then, Blazing Chrome was created using Game Maker 2. The same cross-platform game engine powering titles such as Hotline Miami and Undertale. It's tailored to the creation of 2D pixel art games, and Blazing Chrome is indeed a fully 2D pixel-based game. While it does rely on some modern tricks such as particles, most of the game was built using these old-school methods. Game Maker is a powerful tool with a robust editing system and its own scripting language. In its current form, it supports all consoles and different PC platforms. Now, one of the key elements to designing any retro-style game like this is the low pixel resolution of the source artwork. The artwork in Blazing Chrome is designed for this low resolution and then scaled to fill a larger, higher resolution canvas. In this case, the target resolution is 427 by 240. The idea is to retain the same pixel size as a classic Mega Drive game while expanding the view to 16 by 9. On all systems, this is then scaled up to native 1080p, or when in portable mode on Switch, 720p. Thus, this requires a 4.5x scale to reach 1080p and a 3x scale on Switch to reach 720. The image is handled in a way that shimmering is not an issue during scrolling, so it looks very clean in motion. Blazing Chrome also features a selection of CRT filters, and they look good, though I'm not a huge fan of the curvature. Thankfully, in the upcoming first patch, this will be an option, allowing you to use the scan lines without the curvature. As alluded to earlier then, the artwork is designed within a limited color palette to avoid pushing too far beyond the limitations of classic 90s hardware. The artwork is designed with an eye for fine patterns, and the use of dithering is kept to a minimum. The color scheme skews towards darker shades, lending it more of a Mega Drive look than Super NES, but the visual target is more along the lines of, say, a Konami arcade board from this era, like the one powering Salamander 2, which was an inspiration for the technical features available in Blazing Chrome. Beyond this, some of the artwork was created through the assistance of 3D modeling. Take this elevator for instance. In order to nail the perspective of the scenery, a model was created, color reduced, color swapped, and then touched up by hand in order to create the final 2D asset. This is the same method used by many Japanese teams back in the day to create a sense of perspective using two-dimensional art. Sprite rotation and scaling also play a huge role in this game, and it eschews the modern bone system which can lead to overly fluid rotation. You know, something one might describe as Flash-like. In Blazing Chrome, these effects are programmed to work in a very similar way to the older arcade games instead. We're looking at true scaled sprites here. Characters and enemies are designed from a collection of different sprites, utilizing many individual pieces. This view gives us a better idea of how the sprites can be edited and manipulated during development. Notice how individual sprite layers can be toggled here, demonstrating how they're pieced together to create the larger enemies you might face in the game. Background work is also excellent, with a series of layered backgrounds designed to scroll at a variable rate. Unlike the Mega Drive, which makes adjustments per scanline to achieve this, Blazing Chrome relies on bespoke layers. I also appreciate tricks like this. If you look at the glass here in the background, you might notice the reflections. This was achieved by mirroring the primary sprites on this background layer. Now, it's a transparent layer and it reveals the background behind the buildings, but the sprite doubling trick does effectively give the impression of real reflections. I also mentioned a couple areas earlier in this video which stray from the typical side view perspective. Firstly, there's this tunnel. The sequence was created entirely using scaled sprites and features a different gameplay system with a targeting reticle. Originally, the whole tunnel would move around as players approached the side of the tunnel, but Danilo found that this made people somewhat motion sick, so it was decided to center the viewpoint during normal gameplay while using this tunnel curving animation to give the additional sense of depth and turning corners as you progress through the stage. Then there's the cyberspace level, which is built using actual polygons. A special 3D rendering feature was built specifically for the sequence, and it looks excellent in motion. For those curious about the game's level design then, the stages in Blazing Chrome were created using this editor. Tiles can be laid down to construct the overall layout of each stage, while enemies and objects can be placed and programmed to behave as intended. This is just a small taste of the process, but it's an interesting look at how the stages were constructed. Blazing Chrome also features an excellent soundtrack, and this too resembles the sound of many a classic Konami arcade game. It really drives the action. Take a listen. On the whole then, Blazing Chrome is an impressive homage to Contra and its ilk, and its implementation across every platform is also impressive, but there are some minor differences to discuss here. Firstly, let's just get this out of the way. The PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions of the game are virtually perfect in terms of performance and visual design. This is exactly as the developer intended, and both versions work great. Which leaves us with the Switch version, which is where I discovered a few compromises in the current build of the game. But as you'll see, that doesn't mean they can't be addressed. So what do I mean? Well, first let's talk about performance. On PS4 and Xbox One, Blazing Chrome delivers a flawless 60 frames per second experience. In fact, it's smoother than many comparable games from this era and runs exactly as you would expect. And this is also mostly true on Nintendo Switch. But there are two specific areas in the game where performance doesn't quite hold up. Firstly, during the snowy stage, I ran across several instances where the performance stuttered and skipped just a bit below 60 FPS. Danilo explains, however, that this is being addressed in the next patch by modifying the way the snowflake system works. Basically, the scaling and rotation of all these snowflakes create issues for the Switch's CPU, which is enough just to cause minor dips in performance. And the solution seems to involve adjusting the way the snowflakes work. Secondly, there's the spider boss, which basically runs in slow motion on Switch throughout the entire battle. Unlike many modern games, Blazing Chrome continues to draw all frames of animation, but gameplay speed is reduced as a result, so you get actual slowdown. This too is being fixed, however, and the change is fascinating. Basically, in its current form, the flame effects here rely on particles, the collision of which presents an issue for the CPU in Switch. The solution? The patched version will instead use sprites, which run faster, and honestly, I think they look better too. There's three other things I want to note as well. Firstly, the Switch version is missing the bullet casings, and that's due to the collision calculations hammering the CPU. The casings are being added back in the first patch though, but worst case, without collision detection. Same goes for the blob shadows, which are missing on Switch. These are designed to ground the player and objects by traveling smoothly along the stage floor. Lastly, in the first stage here only, the Switch version is missing a background layer. According to the team, this is a bug though, and is being fixed as well. So yeah, in its current state, the Switch version has a few issues to iron out, but all of them are being addressed soon. And yes, the limited run physical release of the game will include these fixes. Now, beyond the technical design and console performance, I also want to take a moment to discuss the difficulty level and the approach taken when designing the game. Obviously, Blazing Chrome is designed to be a challenging game, but finding the right balance is not an easy process. From the beginning, it was designed with the normal difficulty in mind. The easy and unlockable hard modes then were both modified based on this default difficulty. So what does it change then? Well, one of the main changes involves the common enemy types that often flood into the screen to keep you on your toes. This works a lot like Contra, right? And it ties directly into the difficulty setting. On normal, during these sections, you will encounter 6 or 7 waves of enemies spawning into the scene, at least in scenes where enemies are spawned. It's limited to 6 or 7 waves because if it were infinite, you could artificially boost your score just by standing still. Now, when playing on easy, there's just one wave. Enemy placement remains mostly unaffected, but reducing the number of foes that can appear at any point decreases the challenge. Blazing Chrome also features infinite continues, and I'm told that this was a subject of debate during development. Basically, the old school Contra games have limited continues, and you can earn additional continues, but when you run out of them, it's game over. This is of course extremely uncommon in modern games, and thus it was decided that continues would be infinite. Keep in mind, however, when you use a continue, you're thrown back to the start of a section, so you can't just cheese your way through the game. There's also a number of unlocks included in this game, including the ability to play as 2 other characters, which drastically changes the way the game plays. So, when looking at the big picture then, I feel Blazing Chrome successfully delivers what it was designed to do. This is a game worthy of the Contra name, and based on my experience with Contra Rogue Core D3, the official Contra game being released this year, I feel that Blazing Chrome should have taken up the mantle instead. Thankfully, it stands strong on its own. If you're as into this style of game as I am, or perhaps just remember playing Contra back in the day and wouldn't mind revisiting it, be sure to give this one a look. And if you're struggling to finish it, keep trying. Once you learn the game, it truly shines. It's quickly become one of my favorite games this year. But that's all for the moment. If you enjoyed this video, as always, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell at the top, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, blaze some chrome.